you see, there is a perfect example of the power. There is an imperfect example of the power of fiction. I think it probably is true, actually, that fact may be more strange than fiction, but fiction is actually more persuasive simply because it's, I don't know, it's more pointed up and has more shape in our imaginations. And so I stand before you, obviously, a very welcome, and I'm very grateful for your kindness, a very welcome fiction. And, God, it's hot here. One time when I was in Chicago at Hyatt, O'Hare Airport, I think it was, there were so many people there like today, there wasn't time for me to sign autographs. And in a reckless moment, I said, well, why don't I do a greetings line? And it's the 22nd of August. And so I went out into the atrium there, where the temperature was about 140. And everyone said, they said, Tom will shake hands with everybody. And the temperature was amazing. And there were 1,500 people in the queue. Most of them, for some reason that day, I've been there for 2 days, most of them were women, and the temperature was 140. And I went down, and in a reckless moment, because there's a touch of the St. Francis of Assisi in me. Yeah. That's my bag. And I went down, and the first lady in the queue had been waiting for ages and ages, you know, and she looked so desperate, and she looked so awful. And I looked at her, and the St. Francis of Assisi jumped into my heart, and I embraced her and said, I'm so glad to see you. And like an electric shock, because the Americans have an obsession with equity, it went down the line like that. They said, you get embraced. Now, this was very, very, very reckless thing for me to have done, because I then set about embracing the other 1,499 sweating women. You know, I've got nothing against sweating women. I've had very happy encounters with sweating women. I once had a very happy encounter with a sweating policeman. I mean, he was rescuing me. But so I set on to the second one. It was tumultuous. She had a tremendous grip. But several of them were very short. And what would happen is, they kept going like that to me. You know when people do this? I was like, listen, listen. So I would bend down like that. And then into my ear, like a piece of shrapnel, would poke these libidinous tongues. Well, you may laugh. The theatre of cruelty this afternoon. But it's a terrifying thought. But 3 times, that was the signal. Like SOS or something like that. It was amazing. And by this time, I was reeling, and I was only on to girl number 13. And it went on and on and on. And there was no escape for me because, of course, of the wonderful accident of my fictional existence as Doctor Who, which was, and still is, to a great extent, like now, one of the most intense and wonderful times of my life. And so I found actually that this kind of power of fiction has the most extraordinary effects on people. People sometimes feel, they sometimes get it wrong, but sometimes people feel that they can, on a train coming up, a man came and sat by me, he stood, he said, can I ask you something? So I said, yes, yes. He said, it'll only take a second. And so he sat down and got himself comfortable, and I thought, oh my God, we're only in Watford. And then as he looked at me, I thought, what an amazing personality. He was rather an unprepossessing sort of chap. But as he looked at me, I felt my head swimming. And then I felt the enamel on my teeth beginning to kind of go like that. And then I realized, he was leaning towards me like that the plastic on the table where my little book was beginning to bubble a little. And just before I was going to black out, I suddenly realized he was suffering from the most paint-stripping halitosis. So I called up my enormous willpower. And I said, ha, never like this. I said to him, what's the problem? I thought you'd have liked it more. He said, He said, it's a funny thing, doctor. Do you mind if I call you doctor? I said, no, go on. He said, the thing is, doctor, he said, I wanted to ask your advice, he said, because, you know, nobody will, well, people talk to me, but they won't listen to me. I mean, you know, when I come face to face with people, they don't seem to want to know me. I said, gosh. He said, have you got any idea why that might be? And so I said, listen, I tell you what, why don't you come and sit beside me? So he came and sit beside me, and curious enough, in profile, I could have started a relationship. I mean in a medical sense. So I opened the window, and I thought to myself, how am I going to fetch up the word euthymal? Or Dettol? Or even, have you ever thought of having all your teeth pulled out? Or actually wanting to feel his pulse, which I thought he might have taken amiss, because I suddenly began to suspect that I was hallucinating and that perhaps he was dead. But anyway, by the time we got to Milton Keynes, I said, listen, do you mind if I walk up and down while I ponder this problem? But eventually, I got him a coffee and a sandwich, and one of those sausages that, you know, which is very hot, and that masked the smell a little bit. And he went off feeling better, and I encouraged him. And I said, don't stand so close to people, don't crowd them. I said, you could perhaps start your relationships at, say, 50 feet. People getting the fiction wrong. Quite recently, going into the Silk Sound in Berwick Street, a very famous place where I often work, where instant sincerity is required for corporate videos. As I was walking in, this was a few months ago, and I had an anorak on. I was feeling very democratic that day, and I had my anorak on and an old woolen scarf, and I was slouching in, feeling full of confidence and virtue, and feeling rather good about mankind. And a man who looked to me to be quite sane, but you never can tell. He said, excuse me. I said, yes. He said, I'll never forgive you for what you did to our grammar schools. I thought I must control myself. I said, what did you say? He said, I'll never forgive you, and neither will my wife forgive you for what you did to our grammar school. Instantly, all my virtue and compassion disappeared. I said, what are you talking about, you silly bugger? He looked at me more carefully, and he blinked, and he said, I'm so sorry, for a moment I thought you were Shirley Williams. So you see, the people who are watching the fiction, they encounter the fiction and mistake me for somebody else. Because nearly this time last year, when I was at the Chelsea Flower Show, I used to be very keen on roses, and for old time's sake, I was standing by Gregory's at Nottingham Chilwell, I think, and I picked up Ina Harkness or Madame Edouard Stettler or something like that. That's the name of a rose. And I took it by the neck and was just smelling it like that. When I was a little tap on my coat, I turned around like that, and there was this exquisitely dressed, very ancient, I guess, retired lesbian lady. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, it is, isn't it? And so I was reaching for my pen to sign Doctor Who, or Shirley Williams, I would say. I'm very flexible in that way. And she said, it is Miss Gertrude Stein. And so naturally, what to please her, I said, absolutely emphatically, putting the rose aside like that, and deepening my voice to give an impression that I was a very, very lively 1920s lesbian, who for some reason had actually lived on to be 111. I said, yes, I am, yes, Gertrude Stein. And she said, I'm so glad, yes. She said, and how is Miss Tockless? That was her lover, Alice B. Tockless. I said, oh, Alice is charming, and she's still taking the mickey out of Henry Miller, you know, and goes out with Caris Crosby, and they're interested in outre books and things like that. How nice to see you. And she said, oh, can I kiss you? And so I said, yes. And I put my ear, thinking she meant to put her ear. I did that like that. She came round and she kissed me on the lips like a little butterfly, and off I went to BAFTA, where I had an engagement with a television director who was threatening to use me in a piece. Of course, your directors, that's all they do. They threaten to use me. And then for some reason, it doesn't always work out. And to BAFTA, to actually compound the madness of this appalling day, in the heat of a tent, and being mistaken for Gertrude Stein, I was standing there hoping to be discovered yet again, or perhaps picked up by someone who perhaps was interested in anthropology. When a voice behind me said, "Hello, Tom," in that kind of rising, blood-curdling inflection that suggests, aren't you going to be surprised when you turn around? And so I turned around, and there was a woman, like lots of women, pleasant, not sweating as far as I could see. She licked her lips and her tongue didn't look like shrapnel to me, but there was a kind of quirky look in her eye. And she said, "Tom, you don't remember me." And I said, of course, you know, instantly retreating to my expertise at hypocrisy, I said, "Of course I remember you. We were in a play together at the National Theatre. It was She Stoops to Conquer, and you played Kate Hardcastle." I lied. She said, "No, no." Well, I said, "No, of course it wasn't." I thought, "But it's got to be the Royal Shakespeare then. That's an easy one." I said, "It was the Royal Shakespeare, wasn't it?" "It was the Royal Shakespeare." She said, "No, it wasn't." And I thought to myself, why doesn't this woman drop dead? To actually pursue this a little further, I said, desperate, I said, "No, it wasn't. Well, was it Granada, play for today?" She said, "No, it wasn't," shaking her head as if she would never stop shaking her head. And so I said to her, "No, but forgive me." I said, "You know, I have so many things and sometimes I'm very distracted. I've had an appalling experience today because someone mistook me for Gertrude Stein and asked me how Alice B. Toklas was." I said, "But of course we've met, but it was a play, wasn't it?" He said, "No, we used to be married." You mustn't take this amiss, really, because it doesn't follow that because she asked me that question, of course, that the answer is as plain as it seems to me, although I did look at her very hard, and I do have a very powerful visual memory when it suits me. But however, a few weeks ago, and then you can ask me some questions if you like, I'm in the confessing vein. A few weeks ago, I was in New Zealand. These things sometimes happen. And I'm in Auckland, and everything is going well. I'm being silly and making people laugh and things like that in the daytime. And then I went down to have a meal at Auckland Harbour, which is very beautiful. And I sat there, and I was feeling so happy that I actually listened to my wife for the first time since I've been married, which is quite a long time now. And she was so ecstatic, you know, because it gets so exhausting listening to me all the time, as you'll discover before the afternoon time. And we were chattering and everything like that and feeling very happy. And then I asked for the bill, and the waiter came up and he said, "I'm sorry, sir, it's been taken care of." And I said, feeling very, you know, my own man, I said, "No, please, I didn't want to pay my dinner bill. I'll pay it." He said, "We've taken the money, sir, it's in the till. It's too late." So suddenly my happiness was diluted slightly, and I said to my wife as he drifted away before we finished our wine, I said, "Do you know, I'll bet you anything, it's some zany Doctor Who fan who's paying my bill. No one has ever paid my bill and gone away and remained a mystery. There's going to be a little catch in this." So I sent for my coat, and the waiter brought my coat. And as he was helping me on, he said, "The gentleman who paid for your dinner, sir, would like to say hello. He's a very big fan of yours." So I said to my wife, feeling complacent about guessing right, I said, "You see? Here we go, 3 hours of Doctor Who." So I said, "Lead on." So he led me from the harbour side into this charming restaurant. And as we went in there like that, standing in a light, maybe like that, yeah, something like that, was a tall man, striking looking man, big shoulders, looking at me kind of quizzically, as if he had some kind of inside information, which irritated me terribly because I who is this man? But actors and journalists and television people, you must never actually be at a loss for a word. It doesn't matter what the word is. You must not be at a loss for a word. And faced with this man, I nearly said to him, look, you didn't have to buy my dinner, say hello. But it was just looking at me kind of quizzically, like that. And I said, is your name Morgan? He said, no. My name is Baker, Piers Baker. I'm your son. Well, I don't need to tell you, I was absolutely dumbfounded. But quick as a flash, I said, how do you do? I was quite pleased at that. He seemed amazed at my dexterity with words. He said, pretty well, how are you? Oh, I said, I can't complain. I thought I'm going mad here. But there it was, you see, and what happened was he was having a beer at his hotel, waiting for a friend of his. He doesn't live in New Zealand, he works there. And looking through a window, the only table he could see, I was sitting at. And he said to himself, that looks like my father. And he was right. Right. Now, you don't want any more of this improbability. Is there someone who'd like to ask me a question? Yes.
I've written to you several times now and you've always replied.
Have I really always replied? Can I light up a bit?
You owe me a post. Do you enjoy getting fan mail?
Well, I do enjoy it. Man asks if I enjoy getting fan mail. Yes, I do enjoy getting fan mail. Although sometimes people would rather take it rather far. Recently, you know, I have a reputation for thrift because once looking at Exchange and Mark, I saw an advertisement which said, gravestone for sale, suit a family by the name of Baker. Not expensive. So I rang up and got hold of this gravestone. It was delivered to me. It was leaning against a church stone. And I thought, that's very good. It was only £100, a big one. And, because I'm quite tall, and he said, suddenly the next day, a man was chiseling away, putting the name of someone who had died. I went over to him, he was a Doctor Who fan. I said, there's a thing. He said, what can I do for you, Tom? I'll do anything you like, he said, showing me his chisel. I said, if he wanted me to actually, if, you know, perhaps he thought I wanted him to slaughter someone. I said, I bought a gravestone. He said, oh yes, as if this often happened. He said, oh yes. I said, yeah, and I want you to put my name on it, otherwise, you know, who'll know it's me? So we had a little talk, we discussed the billing, and it says, Tom Baker, 1934, dash. I thought I'd be cautious about the second date. And so there it was, you see. Now this has become something of a kind of mecca for certain kinds of people who are terribly sorry that I've died. Anyway, I'm mowing the churchyard, getting up to Mr. Cheeseman's grave, where it says Mr. Cheeseman, Mr. Cheeseman, 1872 to 1921. It says not dead, only sleeping. So I revved my Honda mower. And Mr. Cheeseman is definitely dead. It's a fearful trick to play on anyone. He is dead. Anyway, I passed him, go around the front of the church, and suddenly I saw a figure loitering near my gravestone. Funny, I got quite proprietary about that. So I thought, that's strange. And then he was looking at me like that, and then looking away as if I hadn't noticed. And one thing led to another, and finally he materialized beside me, and he said, hello. And I said, hello, just like that, reasonable start. He said, I've just been standing by your grave, paying my respects. So suddenly I had this kind of frisson, which I haven't had really since my first confession. I thought, why is he saying that? He said, yes, I brought some flowers and I put them by your grave out of respect. And I thought, why doesn't he notice? I mean, suddenly I felt very diminished, very slight. He must notice. So I cleared my throat, I went like that, and stamped my foot and did that. And of course, I had to stump because my head went round. I thought, he hasn't noticed. I said, oh yes, that's it. And just then a car went by. It was a Peugeot, I noticed, because I drive a Peugeot car. And lots of people going by in my village, they all shout, aye, aye, doctor, and I shout, aye, aye, George, or something like that, or something like, aye, aye, Irene, or good night, Irene, or whatever. It's like that, you know. And so this person said, aye, aye, I said, aye, aye, George. They went by. Oh, he said, that's a wonderful Honda. I said, it was a Peugeot. And so, I thought, what am I talking to this man for? No, he said, your machine, your wonderful machine. Oh, I said, yes, yes, it is. He said, anyway, he said, I'd like to remind you that you're the oldest living doctor now. I thought, he's conceded that I'm alive. I said, no. So I backed away, and he watched me right out of sight, you know? And I went right around the house, because I live in quite a big house, an old school like that, and I kept around that, and he was still looking. I went back the other way, and he was still looking. So I went inside, washed my hair, brushed my tooth, changed my shirt, said hello to my wife, crept out. He was still looking. I thought maybe he'd look there forever. But anyway, eventually, he disappeared. Now, that night, I was aroused about 1 o'clock in the morning by the sound of a pickup. A big pickup was backed up my complicated drive, and three men in masks, were trying to pull the doors off my studio and everything. And I was, of course, naturally frightened and didn't want to rush out there and not having my sonic screwdriver because I had to turn it in. I shivered and called the police and put the lights on everywhere and let the cats out and cleared my throat. And these chaps, they did go, but they were very bored about this. No rush or anything. They took the lorry out and away they went, you know. I was absolutely terrified. The police came an hour and a half later and said very helpful, there was nothing we could do. And I said, well, aren't you going to try for fingerprints? He said they were wearing masks that day. But the police say things like that all the time. They say things like that because largely, in terms of private property, they are a spent force. And you don't have to say things like they were wearing masks. That's why we're not taking fingerprints. And that's why, of course, hardly anyone ever gets caught. But never mind. The police went away, leaving me still shaking. And gradually, the day came. And I went out, and I thought, I'll go and look at my gravestone, because this young man who laid flowers, I thought was still on my mind. And I went there in the early morning light, and there was my gravestone, and chalked across it, it said, wanker. And I was wounded. Next question. In what you call cereal packets at all. I was offered in cereal packets, and people were often, I used to see myself around people's necks sometimes. I didn't really mind any of that at all, because it all seemed to fit in, you know, with the whole cycle of being, I could be anywhere at all. So I could look at someone, she'd say, why are you looking at me like that? And I say, don't you realize I'm hanging around your neck? I say, oh yes, so you are. And so on. I didn't really mind. Yeah, the man next door.
Yeah, I was just wondering, just going back to your origins in Liverpool, back in the Scotland Road area.
Yeah.
When did you start to, at some point, lose your Scouse accent? And when did you ever go back to Liverpool?
Well, that's a lot of questions. The man is alluding to my background in Liverpool and says, you know, how did I lose my Scouse accent? Have I lost my Scouse accent? Here's the thing, you see how careless one can be. But as for getting started, this may be an old story, as for getting started, I'll be as brief as I can, of course. Being in Liverpool at the time, in the war, I can't tell you how wonderful it was and how dramatic it was. And the bombs were falling and the shrapnel was flying. That's why I remember those women in Chicago who were like the shrapnel I used to pick up, which of course we never put in our ears. And so it was that drama of the war and fires and of air raids and staying and listening to older people talk in air all the night long. You'd hear all the people talking, which of course in an ordinary life you would not have heard. So I grew up hearing these, I don't think it was anything particularly appalling, but little intimacies and styles of speech grew up. And of course there was a lot of singing and dancing and praying and singing of hymns, and I got very keen on God at that time. In fact, I had a fling with God, which really rocked on for a long time. I have written a book called Who on Earth is Tom Baker? Otherwise I thought no one's going to buy this. But I really wanted to call it All Friends Betrayed, because that looks like something of my sad background. And God was the first one I betrayed because my faith wasn't profound enough. But I started early on sniffing incense. Of course, in those days, because no one had put a word on it, like abusing solvents, or abusing God's charcoal, or abusing using the incense and the thurible. But, you know, no one, this didn't seem to be very contagious, but from a very early age I was sniffing it. I was absolutely ingesting enormous amounts of incense, which of course were leading me to hallucinations at church, which led me to a heightened state of my own importance, which has been growing out of control ever since, and is sometimes very pathetic, as my wife occasionally remarks. And so when the war ended, you can imagine, never mind the Battle of Britain pilots finding it was all a come down. After they survived the Battle of Britain, they found life a terrible failure after that. When it was all over for me, at the age of 11, I found it a deep, deep disappointment. And the only way I could go on, having no ability, I promise you this is not false modesty, no ability at school at all, which was the only way for working class boys and girls to get out of Liverpool into something more extraordinary than the docks or the merchant navy or a commie chef at the Adelphi or something like that. The only way out was through school, and that was obviously blocked to me. And so I was thrown more and more into the church, and of course being Roman Catholic church, brought up with all the certainties of Roman Catholic Irish bigotry, you know, we knew the answer to everything, and in addition to that, you were allowed to wear a frock without anyone calling you a Nancy boy. You know, I mean in church. Not in the street. And so I retreated more and more into this crazy life of my imagination. And it was that led me to here today. Yeah, there we are. That's a nice short answer. There we are.
We're hoping to hear you sing on the radio.
To sing?
We hope you're reacting to them.
Oh yes, well maybe I will. People keep saying that I'm going to be Dr. Who on the radio, but I don't know about that really. I really don't know, but I'm open to offers if anyone has a nice script. Anyone? Yes, sir?
Is Captain Flint still alive?
What?
Is Captain Flint still alive?
Captain Flint? Captain Flint?
Oh.
Oh, the parrot. Yes, oh yes, parrots live to a great age. Yes, Captain Flint is still alive. Yeah, absolutely still alive. Yeah, go on. Why don't you ask the question? Now I said, go, yeah. What did he say? I didn't hear you properly. Well, it's funny you should talk about Egypt. Well, I met a girl the other day, and she came up to me, I quite like it, she said, you know, my father's an ex-policeman. And she looked a nice girl, so I said, of course he is. I didn't say, you know, well, tell me about it. And because I didn't say it, she started to tell me about it. She said, I said, well, what is this to me, my dear? She said, he arrested you, don't you remember? In London, SW7, about 1976 it was, or 77. I said, really? What was his name? As if I would have remembered the name of his name. She said, George. I said, oh, George. Oh, yes. Yes, I remember. And then I said, was I drunk? She said, well, that's what he said. I said, well, sometimes they tell the truth. And then suddenly I was reminded, I bought a flat, you know. This thing used to happen years ago. Because something had happened in my life, and I suppose I betrayed someone, or betrayed 2 or 3 people, and suddenly I was living in hotels, and I bought a flat, which all I had to do was get into bed. The bed was made, that's why I bought the flat. That's what I liked about it. The bed was made, it was clean, and everything like that, and had running water. And so I said to my agent, I wrote out this check and said, look, could you take care of that? Because I'm off to Egypt, this is where you came in, to do this terrible film. I didn't know it was going to be a terrible film. You always think they're going to be wonderful. And off I went, you see, and so the long time passed, I won't tell you about that. But anyway, I came back, and on the way, before I left Cairo, my agent phoned and said, the keys are in the French pub. That sounds like a grey and green line. The keys are in the French pub. It didn't mean anything to my Egyptian dresser, but it meant something to me. Anyway, I got back rather tired and emotional, and went straight to the French pub, got my keys, put my bags in there. Gaston Berlemont was the man in those days, very famous French landlord. And we got at it a bit. We really did. And the time passed, And we went off to the colony, and then we went back to the Coach and Horses, and then back to the colony. Until in the end, the whole world was absolutely swimming around me. And I thought, I've just got to go home. So I got into a cab and said, Hereford Square. I said as imperiously as I could. He said, oh, whereabouts in Hereford Square? Oh, I said, anywhere. He said, anywhere? It's quite big around there. I said, just put me off on the corner. So he put me off on the corner. I gave him an enormous tip, hoping he would love me. And I got these keys out. I thought, I got to a light. Good heavens, these are the keys. That's incredible, the same keys. I've still got them. And I looked at the keys like that, and I thought, yeah, now. But what number, Hereford Square? That's right. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember what the number of the house was in which I had this little glorious top floor flat. So, well, not to be, you know, gin and tonic does that to you when you've had enough. It was, yeah, it was Beefeaters, I remember, which is 2 points stronger than Gordon's. So, I look, it didn't seem, but you know, it was moving around like that. And so I went up to this house and tried the door, the Yale key, and that didn't go. So I thought, oh well, maybe not that one. So I went to the next one, and I did this. And after I'd done about 11 of these, inevitably, you can guess, the appalling cliche, I really do think the police watch too many of the films. My voice said, hello, hello, hello. I knew it was a policeman. I said, hello, officer. Because up till then, I got on terribly well with the police. I mean, I really did. I mean, they adored me. I didn't need cabs. They used to pick me up and take me anywhere I want. He said, what's happening here then? I said, it's extraordinary. I said, I've just come in from Egypt. Like, have you been to Egypt? I said, I was in Cairo, you know, where people live in graves. Amazing. No flats there. And I bought a flat a few weeks ago, and I've only just come in and picked up the keys. And for the life of me, officer, I can't remember where the flat is. So the policeman, with absolutely clunking irony, said, oh yes, we've been to Egypt, have we? We bought a flat. How expensive flat was it, sir? I said, it was. It was £69,000, but I said, the bed is made. Which he did that. As if that was a proposition. Oh, he said so we bought a flat, have we? £69,000, made bed, and we can't remember where it is. I said, right, you've got it. Can you help me? He said, I can do better than that, I'm arresting you. So he took me by the arm and took me away from the portico of this quite pleasant house, out into the light, the car with his mate, you see, his mate was listening to all this in the car. And as we stepped into the light, he looked at me, he said, Christ, he said, oh, Doctor Who. Doctor Who. I said, that's right, what a memory you've got. He said, George, he said, we've got to help him. He said, it's Doctor Who. He bought a flat. He's been in Egypt. He said, so, does that answer your question? Now, what was it? One more time.
Yeah, sorry, Tom. Just thought to know if you had a favourite incident during filming as the Doctor.
Did you say that? Oh, he said that? Oh, right. Oh, no, I haven't. You're talking like a journalist. There were lots of favourite incidents. Yeah, any incident that involved Liz Sladen, actually, you know, was interesting. Yeah. And I had a very interesting that I had a collision with Lalla Ward. And it turns out that she thinks of me as her favourite monster. And you know, I can't answer that at all. Now, where's Tony, the birthday boy? Who's on the roving light here? Where is he? Oh yes, it's his birthday today. Look at him. 17 and a quarter. Come on, there's a man there with his hand up. Ask me a question, for God's sake.
You've been seen in adverts for somebody playing the Doctor. How did you get involved in that?
In adverts?
Adverts in New Zealand, playing the Doctor. How did you get involved?
Oh, the New Zealand people, you know, because they're very kind people, and they thought that they wanted to sell insurance to take the fear out of death. And so they got me to do it. And so I had to come on television, you know, dressed as the old Doctor, and say, I had to say lines like, I've seen the future. And you weren't there. That absolutely slew them. It absolutely killed them. I said, you weren't there because you didn't know the telephone number, which is TARDIS 0800 1. That was the number. You can do that in New Zealand, because they haven't got many telephones. And so after that, everyone was ringing this number and saying, how can we be in the future with Tom? Which I thought was very charming. So that's how it happened, yeah.
One of the editors said they would have liked to have been Dickens. Would you have liked to have been?
Dickens. Would I like to have been Dickens? Well, no, I wouldn't, but I'm a great fan of Charles Dickens, as you know. I'm a very great fan. I think he's our greatest author, but that's a lot of answers in that. I really adore Charles Dickens. I quite like the areas of Charles Dickens. I think Dickens actually influenced much later writers, such as, for example, in not your time, but in your grandfather's time, like Harold Pinter or Samuel Beckett or people like that. There was a kind of marvelous dysfunctional or disjunctive style about Dickens. All his leading characters, of course, are flops. He was no good on women, so that was a bit of a limitation. But there were nice kind of characters. I remember Mr. Toots in Dombey and Son, who was in love with Florence Dombey. It's a heartbreaking story. And he just adored Florence. And he kept knocking on the door, and she'd open the door and say yes, and he'd say, oh, it's of no importance. And he'd go away, when really he was in love with her, And suddenly he said to a friend, if you could see my legs when I take my boots off, you'd have some idea of what unrequited love really is. And I thought to myself, yes, I just did that as well. I said, ah. But I thought about it a lot since. And I still don't know what it means. But I was
Which of the other doctors would you have liked to have played?
Which of the other doctors? Do you mean there were other doctors? Out of the bag, and as soon as I turned my back, the bloody BBC treacherous outfit was in. Oh, doctors? I've no idea. Don't think about that. And about the beard.
You actually played Rasputin in a film. Was that influenced in any way by your own religious upbringing that you were mentioning before?
I don't think that Rasputin really, wasn't anything like an Irish Roman Catholic. But of course, the Irish Roman Catholics, who have got great expertise in hypocrisy and can, when they want to, make murder sound like charity, did, in a sense, prepare me for the wonderful deal that Rasputin did. It was a terrific pleasure head. And he had this wonderful time, at that time in the courts of Europe and in Russia, the orthodox forms of Christianity were dying a bit, and they were into, wise men, starets they were called, and all sorts of mysticism and things like that. And suddenly, out of Kharkov came Rasputin, this mad, demented creature who had a wonderful, wonderful idea for making people feel wonderful. He used to say to upper-class women, it's funny this, actually, he couldn't do it for poor women. He actually just couldn't. Poverty used to make him impotent. But if they had a few shillings and a famous husband, he was in, like Flynn, if you don't mind me jumping from Russia back to Ireland. And he had this idea which said, if you really want to feel the ecstasy of religion and the intensity of God's love, what you must do is steep yourself, absolutely willingly steep yourself in the utmost degradation. And then you can feel the power of his forgiveness. And they look at him like that. And then he'd say, so if you'll just take your clothes off, start the degradation. This was a kind of beguiling notion. So they actually cut that bit out of the film because Sam Spiegel was rather puritanical. Yeah?
I was just going to ask you, I noticed I read in an interview not so long, a few years back, that you made, many years ago, an appearance in Middle Eastern countries such as Oman and Abu Dhabi. I don't know what year they were, but I used to live in nice factories over there. I just wondered if you had came across any funny experience.
It's funny he's asking me about the Middle East and everything. Everywhere, Doctor Who used to be in 68 countries or something, and I do remember I get some letters, but I couldn't understand what they're about because they're in Arabic, but I am actually a big star in Abu Dhabi. And I simply don't know, some of you may be able to help me there, I simply don't know how to turn this to my advantage. But I used to have this wonderful fantasy that, you know, you'd see in the desert. I know nothing about the desert really, but I've seen Lawrence of Arabia. The camera would track through the pan across the desert, and the desert would howl, and the sand would blow, and then you'd come to these tents, Tuareg tents or something like that, and the camera would creep in like that. And you'd see all these faces looking straight into the camera like that. And then you'd go behind the faces to see what they were looking at. And they'd be watching Doctor Who. Written by Terry Dix and directed by Barry Letts or so, or David Maloney or something like that. But that's a pitiful little confession to make. Go on, that man on the end there.
What would be your worst nightmare?
My worst nightmare? Actually, I've had a few nightmares since I have written my book, because when I went back to revisit my childhood, which how it started, my wife bought me a computer and I learned how to operate the word processor, and I began to tap out. I wanted to write a children's story about a wicked child, really. You know, I mean, a really wicked child. I haven't read, of course, thousands of children's stories, but I've read quite a lot, and some of them, I think, you know, want to be revved up a bit. I've never understood why C.S. Lewis, for example, is considered a great realizer of children. And I wanted to start with a wicked child, and I got started, and this is how it happened. A very charming woman called Lena Worthington, tell you where I got that name from, is riding a nice horse, rather a big horse, maybe 16 hands, across a motorway bridge. You know, and she's going along fine. And then watching her, as this horse is just going very steadily across the bridge, watching her from a tree about 100 feet away, is a boy called Robert Caligari, who has a tremendous high-velocity air gun, a rifle, with a telescopic sight. Not that he needed that at 200 feet, but he had all the gear. And he takes aim like that, and he, just as she reaches 1/3 of the way across the bridge, fires and catches the horse tremendously in the rump. The horse sags like that, and then jumps to the left, right over the bridge, and falls onto the motorway, onto a small minibus carrying 16 old-age pensioners. This causes horror. The horse's front leg catches the man on the side of the head. He swings like that. He crosses the you know, the line across the middle, and coming the other way is a huge Texaco wagon, which goes sideways like that, crashes into two charabancs. The whole thing goes up into a conflagration, and that night on the news, we fear that the death toll is nearly 2,500 people. The trouble is, as you can see, I mean, that's just about it, really. I thought, where do I go from there? Because that was only the second paragraph. And then gradually I thought, well, I'll put him aside, really, because he doesn't sound all that nice. And I began to tap out this thing about my background and what my... Well, to revisit it, really. You know, I know that's terrible, weekend journey backwards, but I thought, you know, what about those people who loved me as I was a child? And I tapped away and found out something about my earliest ambition, which was to be an orphan, actually. Yeah, it's a bit of a sad story, really. I blame it on the Americans. But that's how it all... Yeah? I didn't hear that.
No, me.
Did you say something about Freddie Davis? What can I do? I can't hear you.
Tory party. Do you think there's a gap here in the political market?
For me? Oh, sorry, not you. Do I think there's a gap for me in the political market? No. No, well, I wouldn't mind actually being Minister for Health, you see, because I really am very anti-depression. And I really do think they've got it the wrong way round. I would quite like to actually issue an edict where, you know, when you went to the doctor and you were really feeling down, you say, how down? You say, I mean, terribly down. I think the doctor should be able to give you dockets so that you can go shopping. And although shopping, you know, can become obsessional and addictive, I think it does less damage than, you know, some of these numbing drugs that they're given, and it's certainly a lot less expensive. So therefore, I think that on the NHS, that if they think you're sincere or not too insincere, I think they really should give you kind of, you know, yeah, dockets or cash, really. and say, go shopping, love, come back and tell me what it was like. And therefore, yeah, so you see, that's not all that's good.
Yes, do you have any fantasies that you'd like to fulfill before the insurance is due?
Do I have any fantasies that I'd like to fulfill? Well, no. I mean, you know, not one big overriding fantasy. I have kind of quirky little kind of desires, like I'd like to play Lady Bracknell, but in a very fierce way. But I fear, you know, in a sense, it's been done. Someone talking here today, William Gaunt, I believe. I haven't met William Gaunt, who's working in Canada. I think he was the first actor to play Lady Bracknell, so he beat me to it. But no, I haven't got the big overriding yet. Do I believe in a life after death? Gosh, this really is a leading question, isn't it? Do I believe in a life after death? Well, no, I don't really believe in a life after death, you know, but I desperately hope that I'm wrong. And that it is actually, you know, that there is something after death, and that it's very jolly. I read all the stuff. I mean, when I live in Kent, lots of Jehovah's Witnesses, and of course, they're very convinced about all that. And so I read their stuff. And I read my Bible. In fact, I'm just reading Genesis, and that depressed me a little bit. Because, I don't know if you know Genesis, it's only in, I don't mean the band, it's only in 50 chapters, not all that long, but sometimes it gets a bit, you see, the sad thing about, if you look at your Bible, and lots of us do, don't we, is that the firstborn man, not Adam, of course, the firstborn man was a murderer, and he killed his brother, didn't he? Cain killed Abel. And so we got off to a pretty ropey start. I mean, when I was rereading it in bed the other day, because it was a very big print, and when, you know, Eve was there, and it was just perfect. I suppose it was like New Zealand, really. And suddenly this serpent came along and said, "Psst, have an apple." I forgot what it was, you know, Granny Smith or a Worthington Triumph. And she said, well, he said, "What have that?" And she said, "No." And my heart started to go like that. I thought, don't do it, kid. Just don't do it. But she did, you see, while Adam was asleep, and then she blamed it on him, and away it went. So I really think that there's not much hope for us. But then on the other hand, as I went on to chapter 7, because I really was insomniac that night, when I got to chapter 7, God, well, God, he won't mind saying this, I hope. I mean, he's been around an awful long time, and sometimes to me, I don't think he's learned all that much, really, but he's very impatient at times, because in chapter 7, his favourite was Noah, and he said to Noah, "Get yourself an ark." Noah said, "What?" He said, "Get yourself an ark." He said, "I'm not," he said, so Noah got the ark, and he said, "What's he doing?" He's got all green. So Noah and his gang climb onto the ark, all those animals and everything. What does God do? He commits genocide. He did. He wiped the whole lot of them out. I had to read this again. I thought, really, this is not on. So I had to work with the vicar about that, and he was of no help whatsoever. I'll carry on, because as you know, the Bible begins with the man and the woman in the garden and ends with Revelations. Yes.
Tom, what do you think about the new start for Britain, and do you think there should be a new start for Doctor Who?
Well, I hope there is a new start for Britain. I think the kind of national revulsion that people have expressed in the last few days, you know, indicates something, a great passion for something better, something more equal. You know, when I was in Manchester, I've often been to Manchester, when I used to walk down something really boring, you know, like Deansgate, which is a bit like being in a John Paul Sartre play, which is a bit like being dead, and you think, well, if this is life after death, I'd rather he hadn't bothered me. Deansgate is a disappointment, isn't it? So I'm walking along Deansgate, and suddenly a young man, I don't know, about your age, what, 6, 7, no, a bit older, stop, he says, you know the way beggars always say, have you got any small change? I really could, you know, write lines for beggars. I really could. But they copy each other. We live a business, you know, they, have you got any small change? So I said, sure, Cock, yeah, I've got a pound. Oh, I said, I have £2 like that. And as I reached out, he was standing like this, he said, Christ, Doctor Who. And I said, yeah, that's right, you've got a good memory, yeah. Have the money. He said, Doctor Who. So I thought maybe, you know, he'd been kicked in the head by a horse when he was young and needed to say things a lot before he actually believed it. So after about 17 times, I've got some more money out. I said, oh, look. I said, look, have £3. He said, no. He said, no. He covered my hand. He said, no, I don't want the money, he said. And then he took a deep breath. He said, Christ, can't you get us out of here? And I suddenly had a desire, and you can't, can you, to jump from fiction or to embody the fiction and do something real, like being able to say, put the word around among the big issue people and the people with this pitiful line, have you got any small change? And tell them the TARDIS will be outside Dillon's in St. Anne's Square, just down that alleyway which goes to, you know, the jeweller's shop. I said, I'd be there 8 o'clock. And I could just imagine the word going around absolutely wonderfully, like it was like the old telegraph. And suddenly at 8 o'clock, there's this huge line of people, all the homeless and big issue sellers and the anxious young people of Manchester and old people of that matter. And the TARDIS materializes and I throw open the door and I say, come in, there's plenty of room. Yeah, that would give me a lot of pleasure. Things terrified me when I was a small child. What terrified me really was the desire to please people. I always wanted to please people. That's why I say I admitted to being Gertrude Stein or knowing Alice B. Toklas. And so when the first kind of crisis in my life, I think, really, was when I made my first confession. In those days, one did it at 6, because we were very big into theology and venial sin and mortal sin and what limbo was and all that sort of stuff. And so when I went to make my first confession, I have to confess to you now, and I'll make it brief, you know, life was pretty, apart from the odd bombing, for which I took a lot of pleasure in, I couldn't say that the pleasure amounted to a sin. And so I had a very quiet life, but going to confession every Wednesday to Father Barry was a big ordeal, because you know, I just simply had nothing to say. And this is where, here's a little confession, another one. You see, that's where I started being a professional liar. Because wanting to please him, I began to invent the sins that I couldn't possibly have committed. I mean, you cannot really, credibly, even though I was very intense about it, admit to adultery at the age of 6. And not be surprised that the priest actually clears his throat very loudly. But where I really went wrong, and I have never forgotten, and think with gratitude of this old priest, was when I actually confessed to murder. I wrote that, I'd overheard that somewhere. I said, I've done a murder. He said, since last Wednesday. I said, yes. He said, how many times? That's an old trick. The priests always say that. No matter what you confess, they say, how many times, my son? And then they say, or they used to say, did you take pleasure in it? I said that, yes, I did. How many, he said? I said, 4 times. He said, 4 murders since last Wednesday. Yes, said I, feeling emboldened. He said, anybody we know? Quite a small parish, I mean, it would have leaked. I said, no, Father, they came from St. Teresa's. And he said, well, all right, he said, I'll let you off this time. But stay away from St. Teresa's and come to Mass here all the time. And so I thought to myself, I was really quite pleased. That was my first really glib response. No, it happened in St. Teresa's. Who else is coming? Yeah, go on.
When will you publish your autobiography?
This is a nice question. I didn't prime him. When will my autobiography, The Selected Confessions of Tom Baker, will be published on the 6th of October. But I'm coming to Manchester to sign people and books. Published by Harvard. Yep.
With Sci-Fi, well, travel, what's your favourite city you've ever been to?
What?
What's your favourite city you've ever visited?
I can't. What's the favourite city? I don't know what the favourite city is really, because you know I have betrayed people in all sorts of cities. I really have. I mean, not Chicago, because of all those women with the shrapnel-like tongues. But they meant well. They really meant well. It's just that afterwards it was simple. You know, that can happen as well in other ways. I've got a lot of cats, Burmese cats, and also an Oriental Shorthair, very hysterical. And these upper-class cats, of course, naturally are fed on upper-class food. So they're on iams, and they like actually plain boiled ham. And they also like smoked salmon. But they love this iams, you see. Now, where I live, nothing much happens around there. and there are quite a lot of feral cats. And the feral cats discovered that they could come through our cat door and find these wonderful ions, high-protein food for itinerant feral cats. So they come in, you see, but they're not satisfied. Those of you who know about cats, they're very curious creatures. The feral cats come in at some time, and not only do they eat the ions, but they spray. And so they sprayed against the oven, and they sprayed against the radiators everywhere. And then they went into the sitting room, which is enormous. It's an old school like that. And all over the place there are bits of ions and things like that, or, you know, bats or blackbirds or starlings, because, you know, what slaughterers, cats are mass murderers. And everywhere that feral cats went, they sprayed. So my cats come in because they appear to go to some kind of school like Benham, or they go to work in the afternoons. They come in. Instantly, they're absolutely shaking all over like that as they smell the feral cats. Because, you know, my cats have all been fixed, spayed. So actually, you know, the tremendous kind of lust, you know, from these feral cats with huge balls went through the Burmese like absolutely gibbering like that. And so trying to cancel out this terror, they sprayed over the feral cats. And so they were spraying absolutely everywhere. I mean, the house was absolutely appalling. I was walking around with a mask on all the time. Overwintering butterflies falling off the ceiling. Absolutely terrible. The bloody radiators wouldn't work properly. It was simply terrible. And then once the cats get started, upper class cats get started on this spraying, the buggers can't stop. And my wife's very favourite cat was called Dombey, after a character in Dickens. My wife was sitting there watching something innocent. It must have been very innocent and very boring, really, so it must have been Channel 5. And she's just there like that. And Dombey's on the back of the sofa. It's a new sofa, so, you know, we talk about it all the time. And the sofa's like that, and my wife was watching something paralysing like that. And it was so paralysingly boring, she didn't realise that Dombey had sprayed in her ear. Yeah. You've got a kind of vicious sense of humour. The fact of the matter is, at my age, although my wife, of course, is a good deal younger than me, being very interested in anthropology, the older I get, the more fascinating she finds me. I now have to go around the other side all the time, because the doctor said that this will, you know, take time to heal. Yeah, come on, there at the back. Yeah, yes?
What's the best holiday you've ever had?
I don't do holidays. I don't do holidays. I don't like holidays, really. I send my wife on holidays, and sometimes with her friends, but I'm not very good at it. See, I really do think that I don't know anywhere that I can afford to go to where I can get away from tourists, you see. The thing is that tourism really does get me down a little bit, because I'm just not very good at it. The terrorism of tourism. Yes? Did I have any worries about Doctor Who? Do you notice that's a wonderful question? The more you ask, did I have any worries about Doctor Who? No, I didn't. I didn't have any worries, you see, because unlike now, as I'm in the twilight of my days, when I was in Doctor Who, I always won. And I nearly always had the best lines. I really did. And week after week I won, and week after week I was the children's hero, and as you all know the phrase I've used shamelessly, is that for 7 years or something, I was the only man that "don't talk to strange men" didn't apply to, which was an amazing, experience. So no, I didn't have any worries, and that's a nice question. Come on, yeah, who's waving? Are you drowning or facing? Yes?
What was it like acting in the Deep Baghdad?
Acting in the what?
Deep Baghdad.
Well, you're thinking about, what's it called? Go to Voyage of Sinbad, yeah. Yes, it was very good. It was very good because the man, Ray Harryhausen, was very nice to work with, and I liked having to know the storyboard because there were no monsters there. But more importantly, it was one of the films that the BBC saw when they decided to offer me Doctor Who. So, although I did enjoy it, actually I have a very fond memory of it because, you know, it got me into Doctor Who, or it was a contributing factor. Yeah, that, go on. What did he say? There's a cruel question. He says, if I hadn't done Doctor Who, where would I be now? Well, I guess where I would have been is in Deansgate. And I probably probably would have been saying to Sylvester McCoy, no. Keep the 20 pound note. Who was my what? My boyhood idol really was, I was very into martyrdom. And so it was anyway, so St. Sebastian, I liked it. I couldn't understand why St. Sebastian with all those arrows in it, something kind of perverse about that. That he never seemed to blink, did he? So I was into all that kind of thing. And I was interested in saints and self-sacrifice and lunacy generally, yes.
What do you have planned for your career in the future?
Oh, my dear girl. Isn't this wonderful? She said, what do you plan to do with your career in the future? Well, what future? I don't know. I don't have any plans about that. I just await the call all the time. I just long for someone to actually say, Tom, I've got this idea, and I'd like you to play in a new comedy, a new, comedy thriller on television. And I would look at the script and I think, I haven't read this before, I haven't heard these jokes before, or I fall in love with someone who isn't obvious, a kind of Princess Diana lookalike. And it would be very funny and heartbreaking, and would reveal something, and would be really about people facing anxiety and sometimes winning. And because I don't, when I watch television, which isn't very often, I do find what passes for comedy frequently, I don't see it all, but I do find quite a lot of it plonking and want no part of it. Somebody asked me to be in Chalk. And so somebody said what time it was on, and I stood there watching with absolute incredulity and thought, no. The only thing I can say about chalk is it actually takes away the fear of death, doesn't it? I mean, chalk, I looked at chalk and I said, oh, death, where does I stick? I actually longed for death, but then fortunately it finished after 29 minutes, so I thought I want nothing to do with all that. Yes? Yeah.
Tom, you're full of interesting stories.
Am I?
Anything boring about it?
Yeah, I think boring, it's nice that, isn't it? I once actually was interviewed for a film by some amazingly dull Americans, and very earnest. They kept me waiting a long time, and I was really rather bored with that. And so when I finally got in there, this boring American said, now tell me, he said, what have you done? So I said, oh, Christ. I said, you mean you've never met an actor before? Quite a big producer, this guy. He said, what do you mean? He said, I've met hundreds of actors. I said, well, you asked me such a dumb question like that then. I said, I know everything you've done professionally. I looked you up, I checked. And if you look at that piece of paper in front of you, you'll see everything I've done. And you haven't. So you're not being very professional, are you? And you're keeping me waiting an hour. So, naturally, I felt this job ebbing away. So the guy said to me, he couldn't actually say, just get out. He didn't have a bottle to do that. So everyone went quiet in this room. And so he said, well, I said, could you just get on with it, please? Tell me what this is about and see if I can be useful. Does it need acting? He said, well, this is, pardon my accent, he said, this is a motion picture based on a book by Albert Speer called Inside the Third Reich. So I said, oh, like that, very unhelpfully. I can be marvelously unhelpful. I said, oh, he said, yeah. Then he said to me, American, California, he said, have you heard about the Third Reich? So I said, no, I haven't. Would you like to tell me about it? And he started in, the bonehead, he started in, he said, well, he said, in the beer halls of Munich, he said, just after the First World War. And then he heard me going, and then this fellow with fantastic insight said, I don't think you're interested in this role. I said, you're right. So that was an appalling experience, it really was. Is it my time is up?
One more?
All right, go on, one more. Yes, someone from far away. Go on. My favourite monsters. Oh. Well, they were all my favourites. I adored them, because sometimes I used to feel quite sorry for them because, of course, acting in it, I had to read the script. I didn't always want to, but I had to read the script. And I always knew that I was going to get the better of them, you know, so the more they shouted and the more they threatened. I do remember having a particular like, because I was so fond of David Maloney and who directed? Dougie Camfield, I think, directed something about Zygons. And this was the early days of computers, you know, on the television funny thing, which wasn't like the, you know, like dental school stuff. And they were, if you remember, their computers and their systems of operating were like pizzas. And so I did like the Zygons, I think. Yes, like one of them was a chap called John Woodnut. Yeah, I did. So that was a favourite of mine, yes. So that's what called quick. Did what? I worked with Rowan Atkinson. Rowan Atkinson, you know, is a comic genius, and he's highly intelligent, really highly intelligent, and marvelously accomplished. And when I worked for him, he looked so handsome, and his beard was so black, and his eyes were so flashy. I found him paralyzingly boring. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't much give up. But I was amused by the others, by the girl. And he wasn't amused by my Captain Rum either, which didn't help. So curiously, we don't exchange birthday cards. Yes? Shall I go now? Yes, okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think certainly my day would be complete if one final, not final I hope, one extra reunion was made. So can I ask Liz Sladen to join us on stage? Just so a few things.